want to know what happened with the Draxys invasion? The old soldier's weathered face crinkled into something between a smile and a grimace. Well, grab a drink, kid. This isn't your standard-issue war story. My recorder hummed softly on the table between us. As the last surviving admiral from Earth's defense fleet, Elias Harrison was notoriously tight-lipped about the 3-day war that ended 20 years ago. The fact that he'd agreed to speak with me, a junior historian with barely enough credentials to access the public archives, was nothing short of miraculous. Most people think it was our superior tactics or some secret weapon, he continued, swirling amber liquid in his glass. Truth is, we were getting our asses handed to us for the first 48 hours. Completely outmatched. The bar around us hummed with the usual evening crowd, but a bubble of respectful distance had formed around our booth. Everyone knew who Harrison was, even if most were too young to remember the war itself. The Draxys had tech that made our best ships look like tugboats with pop guns. When their armada appeared beyond Jupiter's orbit, our long-range sensors couldn't even identify half their weapons systems. He took a slow sip. Command was in full panic mode. 2 billion people had already been evacuated from coastal cities worldwide, but we all knew that was just postponing the inevitable. I leaned forward. So what changed? The official reports just mentioned diplomatic intervention. Harrison barked a laugh that turned several heads. Diplomatic intervention. That's cute. What they don't tell you in history class is that diplomatic intervention was code for we revealed the ultimate bluff in human history. Shut. Hours before the end of the war, Admiral Elias Harrison stood on the bridge of the UES Intrepid, Earth's flagship, and currently the only vessel in the fleet that hadn't been crippled or destroyed. His uniform was stained with coolant fluid from when he'd helped seal a breach in the engine room, and he hadn't slept in 36 hours. Sir, the Draxys command ship is hailing us, Lieutenant Donovan reported, her voice steady despite the circumstances. Put them through. Harrison straightened his posture, knowing full well he looked like hell. Not that it mattered. The Draxys were about to dictate terms of Earth's surrender. The view screen flickered to life, revealing the insectoid face of High Commander Zex Trall. The translator implants everyone had received when first contact occurred 3 years ago would convert the clicking sounds of Draxian speech into English. Admiral Harrison. The alien's voice came through artificially flat via the translator. Your resistance has been impressive, if futile. Your species has earned the right to surrender with minimal planetary restructuring. Minimal restructuring was a euphemism. Harrison had come to understand meant only partial terraforming of Earth to suit Draxian biology. Merely billions of deaths instead of complete extinction. Commander, Harrison replied, choosing his words carefully. I appreciate your generosity. However, I'm authorized to inform you that if hostilities continue, we will be forced to activate the Antarctic defense system. The bridge crew exchanged confused glances. There was no Antarctic defense system, at least none they'd ever been briefed on. The Draxian commander's compound eyes flickered with what Harrison had learned to recognize as confusion. Our intelligence has no record of such a system. That's rather the point, Commander, Harrison replied with more confidence than he felt. It's been Earth's final contingency since before your species achieved spaceflight. From her station, Lieutenant Donovan shot Harrison a questioning look. He ignored it. Elaborate, the Draxian demanded. Harrison squared his shoulders. I'm not authorized to provide technical specifications. I can tell you it's a planetary-scale defensive measure that would make Earth undesirable for conquest. A self-destruct system? The Draxian's mandibles twitched. You would destroy your own world? Not destroy, Harrison corrected, improvising wildly. But the system would render Earth and its immediate orbital space uninhabitable to both our species for approximately 500 years. The Draxian commander's posture shifted subtly. This claim is difficult to verify. I understand your skepticism, Harrison nodded. I'm transmitting coordinates where you can send a single scout ship. Our defense forces will permit it to enter Earth's atmosphere and conduct non-invasive scans of the facility. He motioned to Donovan, who looked utterly baffled. Sir, she whispered. Send these coordinates, he murmured, quickly typing a string of numbers that corresponded to a location in Antarctica he remembered from his academy days. An old research station that had been abandoned decades ago. But sir, there's nothing— Just send them, Lieutenant, he hissed. After a moment's hesitation, she complied. The Draxian commander's eyes flickered rapidly, presumably reading the transmitted data. We will conduct this verification. Maintain your current position. Any aggressive action will result in immediate planetary bombardment. The transmission cut off. Sir, Donovan immediately turned to him. What exactly are you doing? Harrison collapsed into his command chair, exhaustion catching up with him. I'm buying us time, Lieutenant, and praying that General Lewis is as crazy as everyone says. Wait, I interrupted Harrison's story. You were bluffing about a superweapon? The old admiral's eyes twinkled. That's what makes this story so good, kid. I wasn't entirely bluffing. I just didn't know if what I was hinting at actually existed. I frowned. I don't understand. 3 years before the invasion, when the Draxys first made contact, General Amelia Lewis, head of Earth's Deep Underground Military Bases program, approached the Security Council with a wild theory. She believed we'd discovered something in Antarctica decades earlier that could potentially serve as leverage against technologically superior species. Something like what? Harrison took another sip of his drink. That's where it gets interesting. See, back in the 2040s, a joint research expedition discovered unusual energy readings 2 miles beneath the Antarctic ice. Whatever they found was classified above top secret. All we knew were rumors, that it wasn't human in origin, and that it predated our civilization by thousands, maybe millions of years. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the bar's air conditioning. You're saying we found alien technology before we met actual aliens? That's exactly what I'm saying. Lewis theorized that what we found might have belonged to a species the Draxys had encountered before, possibly one they feared. But her ideas were dismissed as wishful thinking by most of military command. Until we started losing the war, that is. 36 hours before the end of the war. You did what? General Lewis's face on the secure channel was a mask of disbelief. Harrison kept his voice low, having retreated to his private quarters for this conversation. I implied we had some kind of superweapon in Antarctica. One that would make Earth unconquerable. Based on my theory? The one everyone's been calling me crazy for pursuing? To Harrison's surprise, Lewis didn't seem angry. Instead, a slow smile spread across her face. It was all I could think of, Harrison admitted. They've destroyed 2/3 of our fleet. We're out of options. And you sent them to the Ellsworth Station coordinates? Yes. It was the only Antarctic location I could remember offhand. Lewis's smile widened. Harrison, you magnificent bastard. You have no idea what you've done. I'm assuming that means I haven't just doomed humanity by bluffing? Quite the opposite. Lewis tapped something on her end of the communication. I'm sending you a file now. Priority Alpha clearance. This is for your eyes only. Harrison's terminal beeped as it received the encrypted document. What am I looking at? The truth about Ellsworth Station. It wasn't chosen randomly when it was built in the 2030s. It was positioned directly above what we've been calling Anomaly Zero. Harrison quickly scanned the document, his eyes widening. This can't be real. Oh, it's real, Lewis assured him. The energy signature we detected is unlike anything produced by known physics. And the structure containing it, well, the dating puts it at roughly 300 million years old. Before the dinosaurs, Harrison murmured. Long before, whatever built it wasn't from Earth. And based on the symbols we've partially decoded, we believe it was a weapon, or at least a deterrent, designed to be found by species achieving interstellar travel. Harrison looked up from the document. Does it actually work? Lewis's expression sobered. We don't know. We've never dared activate it. The power requirements alone would drain half the planet's energy grid. But here's where your bluff gets interesting. The Draxys might recognize what it is. How would they? Because, Lewis said slowly, we think whoever built this thing did so to stop something that was systematically conquering worlds. Our xenolinguists believe the symbols translate roughly to containment, imprisonment, and, most interestingly, hunter of hunters. Harrison felt a chill run down his spine. You think it was built to stop something like the Draxys? Or whatever the Draxys fear most in the galaxy? Lewis leaned closer to the camera. Harrison, I need you to keep this bluff going. If I'm right, the mere existence of this facility might be enough to make them reconsider this invasion. And if you're wrong? Lewis's expression hardened. Then I'll meet you in whatever afterlife you believe in, because we're all about to find out if this thing works after all. So there really was something buried in Antarctica? I asked, completely engrossed in the story. Harrison nodded slowly. Something old, something powerful, something that wasn't built by human hands. But what exactly was it? Even now, that remains partially classified. What I can tell you is that it was a structure about the size of a football stadium, buried 2 miles down. Carbon dating put it at roughly 300 million years old. I struggled to find words. Impossible. Yeah, that was our reaction too. But there it was. Evidence that Earth had been visited long before humans evolved. The working theory is that whatever built it used Earth as a place to hide something, possibly from the ancestors of the Draxys or whatever species the Draxys evolved from. And General Lewis thought it was a weapon? Or a prison? The translations were never definitive. But what mattered was what the Draxys believed it was. Harrison's eyes took on a distant look. And as it turns out, they had their own legends about an ancient species that had once nearly wiped them out. They called them the Buried Ones. Hours before the end of the war, Harrison watched tensely as the Draxian scout ship descended through Earth's atmosphere. True to their word, the aliens had sent a single vessel, though Harrison knew the rest of their fleet remained poised to attack should anything go wrong. "They're following the approved flight path," Lieutenant Donovan reported, tracking the ship's descent toward Antarctica. "Any attempt to scan the vessel?" Harrison asked. "Negative, sir. All Earth defense systems are maintaining passive observation only, as agreed." Harrison nodded, his mouth dry. The Bluff had bought them 24 hours. But what would happen when the Draxys realized there was nothing at the coordinates he'd provided? The abandoned Ellsworth research station had been decommissioned years ago. All they'd find would be empty buildings and equipment. Unless Lewis was right. His secure terminal beeped with an incoming transmission. General Lewis again, this time looking like she hadn't slept in days. "They're on their way," Harrison informed her. "I know. I'm tracking them from our remaining satellite network." Lewis's expression was unreadable. "Harrison, I need to know you're prepared for what might happen next." "Which is what, exactly?" "Best case scenario? They recognize what's beneath Ellsworth and retreat. Worst case? They call our bluff and glass the planet." Harrison felt a headache building behind his eyes. "Those are some pretty extreme scenarios, General." "There's a third possibility," Lewis continued. "They might attempt to destroy the Antarctic site specifically. If that happens." She hesitated. "If that happens?" "We have no idea what kind of chain reaction it might trigger. Whatever's down there, it's still generating energy after 300 million years. Destabilizing it could have unpredictable consequences." Harrison pinched the bridge of his nose. "Wonderful. So we might accidentally trigger the very doomsday weapon we're bluffing about." "The universe isn't without a sense of irony," Lewis replied dryly. "But I've taken precautions. I've dispatched a team to the site. If the Draxys attempt anything hostile, we'll try to contain any reaction." "With all due respect, General, how the hell do you contain something we barely understand?" Lewis's expression hardened. "We've had decades to study it, Admiral. We may not know what it is, but we've developed protocols for what to do if it becomes unstable." Before Harrison could respond, Donovan called out from her station. "Sir, the Draxian vessel has reached the coordinates and is conducting scans." Harrison turned back to Lewis. "This is it, moment of truth. Keep me informed," Lewis said, and the communication cut off. For several tense minutes, the bridge crew watched as the Draxian ship hovered over the Antarctic research station. The scans would show them the abandoned buildings, but would they detect what might lie beneath? "Sir," Donovan said suddenly, "the Draxian ship it's powering up what appear to be weapons systems." Harrison's blood ran cold. "Are they targeting the station?" "No, sir. They're not targeting anything. It looks like a defensive posture." Before Harrison could process this information, the communications officer announced, "Incoming transmission from the Draxian command ship, sir." "On screen," Harrison ordered. High Commander Zextral's insectoid face appeared, but something was different about his demeanor. The aggressive confidence was gone, replaced by what Harrison could only interpret as agitation. "Admiral Harrison," the Draxian's translated voice came through. "We have completed our scans of the Antarctic facility." Harrison kept his expression neutral, fighting to control his racing heart. "And? You are in possession of a predecessor artifact." The alien's compound eyes seemed to pulse. "This complicates matters." Harrison had no idea what a predecessor artifact was, but he wasn't about to reveal his ignorance. "As I informed you, Commander, Earth's final defense." The Draxian's mandibles twitched rapidly. "This is not a defensive weapon. It is far more significant. We must discuss new terms immediately." "The predecessors?" I asked, fascinated. "That's what they called the builders of whatever was under Antarctica." Harrison nodded. Their reaction told us everything we needed to know. The Draxys recognized the energy signature immediately. In their history, going back thousands of years before they achieved spaceflight, there were legends of a species that had once ruled their sector of the galaxy. A species that had mysteriously vanished, leaving behind only artifacts of tremendous power. And they thought this thing under Antarctica was built by these predecessors? They didn't just think it, they knew it. The energy signature was apparently unmistakable. Harrison finished his drink and set the glass down with deliberate care. What we learned next changed everything we thought we knew about humanity's place in the cosmos. hours before the end of the war. The secure conference room aboard the Intrepid had been cleared of all personnel except Harrison, his first officer, and the holographic projections of Earth's 5 most senior military leaders, including General Lewis. On the opposite side of the table, the projection of High Commander Zextral loomed, flanked by 2 Draxian science officers. Let me ensure I understand correctly, General Mikhail Volkov of the Eurasian Defense Coalition said, his thick accent coming through clearly. You're saying that this artifact is not a weapon, but something else entirely? It is a seed, one of the Draxian scientists replied through the translator. A world seed. A what? Harrison couldn't help interjecting. The Draxian scientist's mandibles clicked rapidly as it spoke. The predecessors did not build weapons as your species conceives them. They built potentialities. Seeds that, when activated, could transform entire worlds or destroy them, depending on the intent of the activator. That doesn't make any sense, Lewis argued. How can a device know intent? The predecessors did not rely on devices, the second Draxian scientist explained. What you have discovered is partially technological, yes, but also biological. Perhaps even conscious, in ways your science cannot yet comprehend. An uncomfortable silence fell over the room. Are you saying, Harrison finally spoke, that we have some sort of dormant alien life form buried under Antarctica? Not precisely life as you understand it, the first scientist clarified. The predecessors existed partially in dimensions beyond the 4 you perceive. What remains in your Antarctic region is an anchor, a connection point between your reality and something else. General Volkov swore softly in Russian. If activated, High Commander Zextral continued, the seed would draw power from these other dimensions. The results would be unpredictable. In our history, worlds where such seeds were activated sometimes became paradises. Others were reduced to cosmic dust. A cosmic lottery, Harrison muttered. Wonderful. Not entirely random, the second scientist corrected. The outcome depends on complex factors including the dominant consciousness patterns of the activating species. A species primarily motivated by conquest, for example. The scientist's mandibles clicked in what might have been the Draxian equivalent of nervous hesitation. Would trigger a destructive response, Lewis finished the thought. Is that what you're saying? It is. Possible, the scientist admitted. Harrison studied the Draxian commander carefully. And that's why your people are suddenly interested in diplomatic solutions. You're afraid that if you conquer Earth, this seed might activate and destroy both our worlds. Our concerns are more complex than that, Admiral, Zextral replied. The activation of a predecessor seed would draw attention from others. Others? General Lewis leaned forward. What others? The Draxian commander's compound eyes flickered between his scientists, who seemed suddenly reluctant to speak. There are species in this galaxy far older than either of ours, Zextral finally said. Species that monitor predecessor sites. The activation of such a seed would be noticed. You're saying there are other alien civilizations out there watching these seed things? Harrison couldn't keep the disbelief from his voice. Not civilizations as you would understand them, the commander replied. Entities that have existed since before your sun burned hydrogen. They do not interfere with younger species, unless predecessor technology is disturbed. General Lewis's hologram glanced at Harrison with a look that clearly said, "We're way out of our depth here." So, Harrison summarized, trying to make sense of these revelations. You're withdrawing your invasion not because you're afraid of the seed itself, but because you're afraid of drawing the attention of these ancient entities. Both concerns are valid, Zextral admitted. But yes, the latter is more immediate. My species has encountered evidence of their displeasure once before. We do not wish to repeat that experience. What happened? Harrison couldn't help asking. The Draxian commander's posture stiffened. An entire star system in what you call the Crab Nebula, once home to billions of my kind, now an expanding cloud of radiation and elementary particles. The implications hung heavy in the air. Then it seems, General Volkov broke the silence, we have mutual incentive to resolve this conflict peacefully. So that's it? I asked, incredulous. They just left? Because they were scared of some cosmic boogeyman? Harrison chuckled. It sounds ridiculous when you put it that way. But remember, the Draxys had already conquered 17 other worlds before reaching Earth. They weren't exactly given to baseless superstition. And the official story became diplomatic intervention? What would you have called it? Aliens retreated because they're afraid of the eldritch horror we've got buried under the ice. Not exactly the kind of thing that inspires public confidence. Harrison shrugged. Besides, what followed was genuine diplomacy. The Draxys became our most important ally in introducing humanity to the wider galactic community. I glanced down at my notes. But what about the artifact itself? The seed? What happened to it? Harrison's expression grew more serious. That's where the story gets complicated. After the Draxys left, there was considerable debate about what to do with it. Some wanted to study it more aggressively. Others wanted to bury it deeper and pretend we'd never found it. And which side won? Neither. 3 days after the Draxys fleet withdrew, something happened at Ellsworth Station. Something that's still largely classified. 3 days after the end of the war. Harrison's shuttle touched down at the perimeter of what had once been Ellsworth Research Station. The landscape around him was transformed, not destroyed, as one might expect after some catastrophic event, but altered in ways that defied easy explanation. The snow and ice remained, but it was different somehow. Crystalline structures that caught the Antarctic sunlight and refracted it in impossible rainbows. The air itself seemed charged, as though the boundary between atmosphere and vacuum had become more suggestion than physical law. General Lewis met him at the landing zone, her expression grim. "What happened here?" Harrison asked as they walked toward the main facility, or what remained of it. The buildings were intact, but they seemed to shift subtly when viewed from different angles, as though existing in multiple configurations simultaneously. "We're still trying to figure that out," Lewis admitted. "After the Draxys left, we increased our monitoring of the artifact. Energy readings started fluctuating in patterns we hadn't seen before. It was dormant for 300 million years, and it just happened to wake up after the Draxys scanned it?" Harrison couldn't keep the skepticism from his voice. "That's the working theory. Their scans might have triggered some kind of response mechanism." Lewis led him through a security checkpoint where each guard wore not just standard protective gear, but also strange metallic headbands. "These help filter the perceptual distortions," she explained, handing one to Harrison. He put it on reluctantly. Immediately, the visual shifting of the building stabilized, though the rainbow refractions in the ice intensified. 2 days ago, at 0347 hours, there was a massive energy surge from the artifact," Lewis continued as they entered the main building. "Not an explosion, not radiation, something else entirely. When our teams regained access, they found this." She gestured around them. The interior of the facility should have been a standard research station. Utilitarian furnishings, monitoring equipment, perhaps a few creature comforts for the staff. Instead, Harrison found himself in what appeared to be a vast chamber that couldn't possibly fit within the building's exterior dimensions. The walls were covered in shifting symbols that resembled the ones he'd seen in Lewis's classified files, but animated now, flowing and changing like liquid mathematics. The floor beneath them was solid but seemed to pulse with faint luminescence that responded to their footsteps. "What the hell is this?" Harrison whispered. "We're calling it a translation interface," Lewis replied, her voice equally hushed. "It appeared after the energy surge. The artifact didn't destroy the station. It converted it." "Converted it into what?" "A means of communication." Lewis led him toward the center of the impossible room, where a column of light rose from floor to ceiling. Within it, shapes formed and dissolved. Some recognizable as geometric forms, others entirely alien. Communication with what? Not what, who? Lewis's expression was a mixture of awe and trepidation. "The predecessors didn't vanish, Admiral. They evolved, transcended physical form, and now they're reaching out to us." Harrison stared at the column of light, trying to process this information. "Why now? Why us?" "That's the question, isn't it?" Lewis sighed. "The working theory is that our willingness to bluff rather than use the artifact as a weapon, even when faced with extinction, triggered some kind of evaluation protocol. We passed a test we didn't know we were taking. Eats. A test," Harrison repeated flatly. "So what happens now?" The light column pulsed, and suddenly the shifting forms within it coalesced into a roughly humanoid shape, though one with proportions that seemed to constantly adjust, as though physical consistency was an afterthought. "Now," a voice spoke directly into Harrison's mind, bypassing his ears entirely. "We talk." I stared at Harrison in disbelief. "You're saying you personally spoke with one of these predecessors?" The old admiral's weathered face creased in a smile. "That's what the official record states." "And what did it say?" "What did you talk about?" "That," Harrison said, finishing the last of his drink, "remains classified at the highest level. What I can tell you is that humanity's understanding of our place in the universe changed fundamentally that day. The Draxys invasion wasn't the end of something, it was the beginning. The beginning of what?" Harrison's eyes took on that distant look again. "Of humanity's true purpose. The reason we evolved on this particular rock, orbiting this particular star. Which is I prompted when he didn't continue. Consider this, kid. What if intelligent life isn't the random outcome of evolution that we've always assumed? What if consciousness itself, at least the particular type of consciousness that humans possess, was the whole point? I frowned, trying to follow his logic. I don't understand. The predecessors didn't just leave that artifact under Antarctica by chance. They placed it there, on a world that, at the time, was dominated by nothing more sophisticated than primitive bacteria. Why would they do that? Because they were playing the long game. A game measured in hundreds of millions of years. Harrison leaned forward. They seeded thousands of worlds across the galaxy, each with the potential to produce intelligent life. Earth was just one of many experiments. Experiments in what? In creating consciousness that could eventually join them. Harrison tapped the side of his head. The human mind, specifically, our capacity for abstract thought, for imagining possibilities beyond immediate physical reality, isn't just a quirk of evolution. It's a deliberately cultivated trait. I sat back, stunned by the implications. You're saying human evolution was guided? Not directly controlled, but nudged in certain directions over millions of years. Harrison shrugged. At least, that's the theory that emerged from what we learned at Ellsworth. And the Draxys? Where do they fit into this? Different experiment, different parameters. Their consciousness evolved along different lines, more collective, less individually imaginative. Both valid approaches to the same ultimate goal, which is creating species capable of eventually transcending physical form entirely, joining the predecessors in whatever state of existence they've evolved into. I let that sink in for a moment. And we're, what, candidates for ascension or something? Harrison chuckled. Put that way, it sounds like religious nonsense. But in scientific terms, we're talking about a form of existence beyond the four-dimensional space-time we currently inhabit. The predecessors exist in, or at least can perceive and interact with, dimensions beyond our normal experience. So what happened after your conversation with this entity? Did it just leave? Not exactly. The interface at Ellsworth remains active to this day, though access is restricted to a select few researchers with the psychological profile to handle direct communication with non-human consciousness. And the Draxys? Did they ever threaten Earth again? Harrison shook his head. Quite the opposite. Once they understood that we were, in a sense, cousins in the predecessor's grand experiment, our relationship changed dramatically. The Mutual Development Treaty of 2046 established the framework for what eventually became the Galactic Concord. All because of what was buried under Antarctica, I mused. All because we chose not to use it as a weapon, Harrison corrected. That's the detail that gets lost in the classified reports and redacted histories. It wasn't the artifact itself that changed everything. It was humanity's approach to it. He leaned back in his seat, suddenly looking every one of his 80-plus years. You know the irony of the whole thing? If the Draxys had never invaded, we might never have discovered the artifact's true purpose. It might have remained just another scientific curiosity, buried in the ice for another million years. So the invasion was actually fortunate? I wouldn't go that far. Thousands died in those first 48 hours. But in the cosmic scheme of things... Harrison trailed off, gazing into his empty glass. Let's just say the universe unfolds in strange ways sometimes. As I packed up my recording equipment, Harrison placed a weathered hand on my arm. There's one more thing, he said quietly. Something not in any official record. I paused, intrigued. What's that? The conversation I had with the predecessor entity. There was a moment when it showed me something. A glimpse of possibilities. Futures branching out like a vast tree, each limb representing a potential path for humanity. What did you see? Harrison's eyes took on that distant look again. In some branches, we destroyed ourselves through war or environmental collapse. In others, we stagnated, never reaching beyond our solar system. But in a few, just a few, we joined the predecessors, becoming something more. And which branch are we on now? The old admiral smiled enigmatically. That's the thing about free will, kid. We're making that choice every day, with every decision. The artifact didn't change our nature. It just showed us what we could become. He stood slowly, joints creaking with age. The war with the Draxys ended the moment they learned what we had buried beneath Antarctica. But humanity's real journey, that's just beginning. As he walked away, I couldn't help but glance upward, through the bar's skylight, to the stars now visible in the evening sky. Somewhere out there, other experiments were unfolding on countless worlds. Other consciousnesses were evolving, perhaps approaching their own moments of truth. And somewhere beyond normal perception, the predecessors were watching, waiting for the children of their grand experiment to join them in the cosmos. 20 years later, I stand at the edge of what was once Ellsworth Station, now the center of the Antarctic Communion Complex. The crystalline structures have grown over the decades, forming spires that reach impossibly high into the clear polar sky. My credentials as Earth's official historian grant me access that few others receive. Harrison has been gone for 15 years now, but his legacy lives on in the diplomatic corps that now represents humanity throughout the galactic community. The guard hands me one of the newer perception filters, sleeker than the crude headbands of 20 years ago, but serving the same purpose. As I fit it over my temples, the familiar disorientation hits me, then passes as the filter calibrates to my brainwaves. The interface is expecting you, the guard informs me, gesturing toward the central dome. I nod my thanks and proceed along the pathway. Around me, human and Draxian researchers work side by side, studying the ever-expanding crystalline growths that have transformed this part of Antarctica into something alien, yet beautiful. Inside the dome, the column of light still rises from floor to ceiling, though it has grown more complex over the years, branching like a tree of pure energy, each limb extending toward different parts of the chamber. I take my position on the central platform, feeling the familiar tingling as the interface scans my neural patterns. Historian, the voice speaks directly into my mind as it has during each of my previous visits. You have questions? Always, I reply, both aloud and in thought. About the future, the voice observes. Not a question. Yes. The Draxian High Council is proposing the next phase of integration. There are concerns among some human factions. The light column pulses, shapes forming and dissolving within it. Fear of loss of identity. A natural concern for individuated consciousness. Is it justified? All fears are justified from the perspective of those who hold them. The voice has grown more adept at human communication patterns over the years, though it still occasionally speaks in ways that require interpretation. But transformation is not erasure, integration is not absorption. Some believe we're moving too quickly. By what metric? The universe is 14 billion years old. Your species has been self-aware for a mere moment in cosmic time. I smile despite myself. That's not especially reassuring to people worried about the next election cycle. A ripple passes through the light column, what I've come to recognize as the entity's version of amusement. Perspective is difficult for time-bound consciousness. That's why I'm here. The Council wants reassurance that the integration proposal aligns with the optimal path. The entity is silent for a moment, though with a being that experiences time differently than humans, such pauses are difficult to interpret. We do not dictate paths, it finally responds. We observe. We offer perspective. The choice must be yours. But you've seen the possibilities, I press. The branching futures Harrison described. Many have collapsed. Others have emerged. Your species excels at creating new potentialities. Is that a good thing? Another ripple through the light. It is the thing that makes you human. I consider this. The integration proposal. Does it lead toward or away from transcendence? The light column expands suddenly, filling the chamber with prismatic refractions. For a moment, I experience what Harrison must have seen 2 decades ago. Branching futures, countless possibilities, some brilliant with potential, others dark with warning. Transcendence is not a destination. The entity responds as the vision fades. It is a process. The proposal is neither correct nor incorrect. It is simply one possible step. That's frustratingly vague, I observe. Specificity is a constraint of 4-dimensional thinking, the entity counters. But I can offer this. The proposed integration with Draxian consciousness would expand human perception in ways beneficial to your further development. At what cost? Change always carries cost. Nothing is gained without something being released. I sigh. Will we lose what makes us human? The light pulses again, this time forming a shape that resembles a DNA double helix, but with additional strands weaving through it in patterns that seem to defy normal geometry. What makes you human is not static. It has evolved continuously since your species first emerged. What you fear losing is merely your current state, a state that is already transitional. Transitional to what? To what you will become. The helix transforms, the strands separating and recombining in new configurations. The Draxys followed a different evolutionary path, but toward a complementary form of consciousness. Integration does not mean erasure of either pattern, but the creation of new possibilities that neither could achieve alone. I watch the dancing strands of light, trying to grasp concepts that push at the boundaries of human understanding. Is this why the predecessors created the artifacts? To eventually bring different consciousness types together? Creation implies a beginning. The entity responds. The artifacts are interventions in an ongoing process, catalysts rather than origins. But to what end? End implies cessation, the entity counters. Perhaps consider. To what continuation? I resist the urge to sigh again. 20 years of diplomatic relations with post-physical entities has taught humanity patience with communication differences, but sometimes the philosophical gaps remain challenging. Let me rephrase. What does this process ultimately make possible that wouldn't be possible otherwise? The light column contracts, then expands in a pulse that momentarily fills the entire chamber. In that expansion, I briefly perceive something vast, a network of consciousness spanning not just our galaxy but beyond, a complex interweaving of thought and existence that makes our current conception of reality seem as limited as a two-dimensional drawing trying to represent a sculpture. Participation, the entity says simply as the vision fades. I stand in silence for a long moment, processing what I've been shown, or at least what my limited perception could grasp of it. I'll tell the Council the integration proposal has merit, I finally say, but that we should proceed with full transparency and voluntary participation. A wise approach for consciousness that values individual choice. The entity agrees. The path of forced evolution leads to unstable outcomes. I think of the Crab Nebula, where the Draxys once attempted to weaponize a predecessor artifact. Some histories are best not repeated. Before I go, I say, there's something I've always wondered. Why Earth? Out of all the potential worlds, why place an artifact here? The light column ripples in what I've come to recognize as something like contemplative amusement. Earth was not special, the entity responds. And yet, all worlds where consciousness emerges are special in their particular way. Your planet had favorable conditions. For developing human consciousness specifically? For developing consciousness that asks why? The light pulses. A simple question with complex implications. It is the beginning of all science, all philosophy, all art. And the Draxys? What question defined their evolution? How? The entity replies. Their consciousness excels at process, at methodology, at implementation. Together we might actually accomplish something worthwhile. I finish the thought. Another ripple of apparent amusement. You already have. The question is what you might accomplish next. As I leave the chamber, I glance back at the column of light, this impossible interface between human understanding and something far beyond it. Harrison was right all those years ago. The war ended the moment the Draxys learned what we had buried beneath Antarctica. But the real story, the real journey, was just beginning. Outside, the Antarctic sun casts rainbow refractions through the crystalline structures that continue to grow across the landscape. A Draxian researcher nods a greeting as I pass, its compound eyes glittering behind a modified perception filter adapted for its species' unique neurology. Productive communion? It asks in the precise, slightly flat manner of translated Draxian speech. Enlightening, if not entirely clear, I reply with a smile. The Draxian's mandibles click in what I've learned to recognize as appreciative amusement. Clarity is overrated. Possibility is where growth occurs. As I look up at the crystalline spires reaching toward the sky, I can't help but think that the true legacy of what was buried beneath Antarctica isn't the artifact itself, but what it revealed about humanity's potential, and the universe's endless capacity for wonder. The war had ended, but the greater adventure was still unfolding, one possibility at a time. If you enjoyed this story and want more cinematic sci-fi like this, support the channel. Click the link in my bio to help me keep these stories alive.